My name is Ron Rockland. I'm chair of the Department of Engineering Technology at NJIT, and I'm going to be talking today about the assessment and evaluation, or what we call A&E process, for the department. The rationale for assessment and evaluation process generally is that you think you're a good teacher, but how do you know that students are really learning? And we really need to be student focused. A corollary to that is, how effective are the courses you're teaching? How can we as a program assure that needed material is being taught? So even though you're assured on a course level, how do we know it's being assured at the program level that students are learning? How can we maintain consistency among different people teaching the same course? We have multiple sections of a course. We want to be able to have students learn the same for all courses. And finally, how can we have a system that will support our accreditation, which is ABET, essentially it's technology of ABET? The rationale for our own program is that courses taken as a total lead to a program. For accreditation and for delivering a great program, we need to look at what was called program outcomes and now is called student outcomes. But then we need to do two types of evaluations. We need to evaluate at the course level, where the course has produced the skills and knowledge for students, again, student focused. We're going to call that CLO, or course learning outcome. And then how do we evaluate whether a program has produced skills and knowledge for students, which are called student outcomes, or SO. Let me give you some definitions before I go on with this program. Course learning outcomes really are what faculty and department collectively have identified, so you're involved in this process, as essential knowledge and skills required for students successfully completing the course. Objectives are going at the beginning of the course, outcomes are at the end of the course. And it may relate to topics, but from the student perspective, and the key is the student perspective, and needs to be defined in a way as to be measured and how it will be measured. So those three red phrases are key. It also, you need to know whether or not you are successful. An example of a course learning outcome would be identify in writing the best circuit theory to apply to various resistive circuits to solve voltage and current measurements. For my course, I may want to talk to them about different circuit theories, but I want to have an outcome worded in a way that I'm measuring student learning. The definition of assessment is one or more processes that identify, collect, and prepare data to evaluate the achievement of course learning outcomes. This is a definition from our accrediting agency, ABET. So I'm collecting and preparing data. The other part of that process, the A&E process, is evaluation, which is one or more processes for interpreting the data and evidence accumulated through the assessment process. I accumulate the data through assessment, I interpret the data for evaluation. And evaluation also determines the extent to which program outcomes or program educational objectives are being achieved. It is key for the program, but it also will be key for the course. So what do we want out of this assessment and evaluation system? Well, one is a simple system that can be filled out by instructors in a reasonable amount of time. We don't want this to be such an onerous system that it's impossible to do. We want a system that serves both accreditation, ABET, as well as general good teaching practices. A system like this is meant to help you be better teachers. And we also want a system that's sustainable. Again, if you look at that first bullet, if it's simple, then it will be sustainable. Within the next few years, the goal is to create a culture of assessment in all ET options. So let's look at the parts of the overall assessment and evaluation system. We're going to have a consistent syllabus format and information for courses. We're going to create course learning outcomes, which we call CLO. We're going to identify the relationships between these course learning outcomes and student outcomes, which are related to the entire program. We're going to develop and implement something we call a FAKAR, Faculty Course Assessment Report. But then the question comes in, how do I know if I've been successful? There are going to be 4 elements in terms of helping you understand that. It comes from the course learning outcome, and it's going to be reflected in the first 2 pages of the common syllabus. They will have the course learning outcomes. We then have an assessment tool to measure, which is assess, the course learning outcome. Student work could be an assessment tool, tests, reports, presentations. We're then going to be using a metric on this assessment tool, and it may be a grade on a presentation rubric, it may be a test question related to the course learning outcome. And finally, we're going to have a cut score or a level of acceptance, which really answers the question, what is acceptable level of students below a certain level of the metric? If we have these, we will know whether or not we've been successful. Well, what if a student is below a cut score? In the FAKAR, that report that I'll be talking about a little later, there's an area for proposed actions. If a student falls, or the whole group of students fall below the cut scores, you need to think about some change, some proposed action to improve that learning, and then the coordinators will be reviewing the proposed changes. Let me talk about one of the elements of the system, which is a common syllabus. The first 2 pages of each course is common to all the instructors. It will have things like topics, computer usage, required materials, and such. Notice they're going to be independent of an instructor and independent of a semester. The only exception is the grading policy, which may vary among instructors. And you may have more course learning outcomes than student outcomes. Some may not be directly related to the student outcomes, and that's fine. Page 3 and after will be instructor-based. That will be whatever you want to put in there. It should include a detailed course outline, class hours, office hours, and any other course information you may consider important. But the first 2 pages will be standardized. This is an example of the top half of page 1, and we have the typical course numbers, names, structures, etc. If you notice in the bottom of this table, we have computer usage. It's important to know that throughout this whole program, students are experiencing the application of computers. Then we have a listing. In this case, it's a course that had 9 course learning outcomes. And if you look at this, if you want to stop the tape and just read how they are worded, you can get a sense of how to word a course learning outcome. There will be a separate video on creating course learning outcomes. We then have class topics. Note, we don't have a schedule, so this is independent of any semester. These are the topics I want to cover. And then we start with student outcomes, where we relate a course learning outcome to one of the student outcomes, typically A through K or others. The page 2 will also include a grading policy. This is just one example of a grading policy. It should include a paragraph, and this is a suggested paragraph on academic integrity, and should also include a section on student behavior. And finally, at the bottom, there is, I would call, a disclaimer, which basically tells students that you may change some of the course material. What we're doing with course learning outcomes and student outcomes is relating the two. So if you look at this example, we have 2 course learning outcomes, one from course A, one from course B, and both of them are related and tied into student outcome A. The achievement of the course learning outcome means we have achieved the student outcome. Let's now look at the FAKAR report and the elements of that. It's initially used for courses involved in assessment and evaluation of student outcomes. And what I mean by that is that for the 4 ABET accredited programs within engineering technology, we've identified certain courses we're using to assess and evaluate student outcomes. Other courses are listed as covering material based on the topics, but we're not being assessed. It really is, in this report, a guide to what should be covered and assessed and how. All courses will use the FAKAR report, but the table in it will only be filled in initially for those courses that are involved in the assessment and evaluation. The FAKAR and related course learning outcomes will really determine how well instructors in multiple sections are following required topics. So it maintains consistency among multiple sections and also helps guide new instructors. What should I be teaching? How should I be teaching? How should I be assessing? That will all be identified in these FAKARs. This is an example of page 1 of the FAKAR. Again, it's standard material, course description, modifications made to course since last offering. So you can see what was changed and then was there any impact. We have, again, computer usage. We have the course learning outcomes for this course. We have the student outcome assessment that are going to be student outcomes specifically for this course. And then we have that table. And if you look at the table, we have the student outcomes, which are the program outcomes that are coming from this course and possibly from other courses. We have the course learning outcome that's tied to that student outcome. We have an assessment tool, and we have a metric that's used. And then we have a table that basically says how many students, and in our case we looked at a grade of 70%, were above or below. And if there were a greater than, and we consider 30%, below a score of 70%, then it requires actions. If you looked at the first student outcome and course learning outcome, there were only 9 students that were greater than 70%. 11 were below. And this is for a specific test question, not the test. That means there needs to be some action. The last part of page 2 in the FAKAR has 2 sections. One is a faculty reflection. It's for you to think about what would you like to do. It may not tie into the table at all. It may be a wish list. It may be based on your observations. Feel free to put anything in there. The bottom half is proposed actions, and they fall into 2 categories. Again, things you like to see done, and maybe it's improved, not based on any assessment, but a new tool, a new software application you like to incorporate. Feel free to put it in. But if you notice, items 3 and 5 say from table. Those are specific proposed actions that have occurred because of the assessment and evaluation process. Those are critical to us, and that is what your coordinator will be involved with. What are our target goals? Well, in 2010, we started implementing this FAKAR system in specific courses within the ABET accredited program. We're going to continue with the implementation throughout, and by the end of 2011, we'll have enough data to perform some preliminary trend analysis. In 2012, we intend to implement the FAKAR system for all courses within the ABET accredited program. Courses that are listed initially as covered, we're going to fill in the table. In 2013, we're going to be starting this process for all options, whether they're accredited by ABET or not. And in 2014, the culture will have changed. We will have full assessment and evaluation process for all options.